So this is some startling news. So they're not telling you everything. The mainstream news does not tell you the truth about COVID. They lied to you about ivermectin, said it was not a human medicine when it won the Nobel Prize for Human Medicine in 2015 and is one of the most prescribed drugs in the history of human beings. Billions of prescriptions have been written for ivermectin for human beings, and it's saved many lives. Billions. So they're not telling you that. They're not also telling you that everyone's going to get COVID eventually. They're not telling you that. That's a fact that's accepted by the experts, but they're not telling you that, are they? They keep telling you to be afraid that you might get it. We're all going to get it. So you should prepare for when you get it. And now we find out they're administering the jabs incorrectly. This is Dr. Campbell, Dr. John Campbell from the UK, and he's got a very popular series on YouTube. I've seen this guy on CNN. They brought this guy on CNN to talk about because he's all about the data and stats. This guy's all about data and stats and correct. And so watch what he says about the jabs. You ready?
Because I'm just at a loss at what to do about this. And I think it's really important. I'm going to give evidence that we should be aspirating the needle before we give the injections. Basically, I think that most people in the UK and the United States are giving the vaccine injections wrongly. Now, what you should do when you're sticking a needle into a muscle, because it has to be an intramuscular injection, so the needle's not that quite big on the vaccine, but you stick it in, then you should hold it like that. And then what I always do is I draw back. And if you draw back blood, you know you're in a vessel, so you would pull it out and change the needle and get a different site. But that's not being done. Now, if that's not done, let me show you what can happen. So this is what can happen. So imagine you're giving the needle, you stick it into the muscle, and for just pure misfortune, you find you end up in a blood vessel. Then if you draw back and you're in the muscle, then no blood will come out. But if you're in a blood vessel, then you draw back and there you go. You know straight away you're in a blood vessel and you know not to inject it, because you would then be giving this intravenously. That would be going straight into a vein, not into the muscle where it is supposed to go. So we're doing this wrong. Now, I'm going to be giving evidence for this today, and this really has to...
So he's pointing out they're not injecting people correctly. And where does is he just making this up off the top of his head? No. Here's where he gets this info. They're injecting people incorrectly. And here's where he gets the information.
So I'm going to give evidence from this paper here. Now, do look at it for yourself. I always post the links, of course. Now, this is the name of the title here, intravenous injection of coronavirus disease. Now, this is with messenger RNA vaccines. Can cause acute myopericarditis. So myocardium, the middle layer of the heart, pericardium, the outer layer of the heart, and itis on the end means inflammation of, because we know it can cause this heart inflammation. Now, this is from the Clinical Infectious Diseases. They describe it as major article, peer-reviewed, published with the auspices of the Infectious Disease Society of America, HIV Medicine Association, Oxford University, and Oxford Academic Publishing. So, I mean, basically, what more do people want to start listening to this? It's just unbelievable.
So this is a peer-reviewed major article from all those places, Oxford University, all of those places. And what have they found? They found that if you inject the vaccine intravenously, it's going to cause that heart inflammation that he just pointed out. That's what they've discovered. And that there's a big chance of you doing that if you don't aspirate the syringe, meaning when you poke someone, you draw a little bit back, and if blood comes in, that's no good. You got to throw out the syringe and get a new one and go back in. So it's not supposed to have blood in it, because if it has blood in it, that means you're sticking it into a blood vessel, and that's going to cause heart inflammation, according to this study. And it's a peer-reviewed major article. This is not some quack.
This is still being done. And in my view, disgraceful. Now, let's get to the evidence.
And it's disgraceful that they're doing it. So he goes into the evidence that they found. I'm not going to do that, but I will go here.
intravenous injection of COVID-19 messenger ribonucleic acid vaccine may induce myopericarditis.
So there's the conclusions that intravenous, if you put the vaccine intravenously, it's going to cause heart inflammation. That's their conclusion.
No, I mean, it can't be any clearer. Brief withdrawal of syringe plunger to exclude blood aspiration may be one possible way to reduce such risk. Direct quote from the authors.
So they're saying aspirate the syringe and you can reduce the risk of that happening. They're not doing that.
Both Pfizer, BioNTech and Moderna have clearly stated that their vaccine should only be given via the intramuscular route, not the intravenous route.
So intramuscular. So you put it in your muscle, not in a blood vessel. And both of those companies recommend that you do it intramuscularly, not intravenously. And watch what he says.
So why on earth are we not ensuring that the manufacturer's recommendations are obeyed? And it's done according to the manufacturer's guidelines, rather than giving the occasional intravenous injection by mistake. It's just completely unacceptable. Current CDC and WHO guidelines no longer recommend precautionary measures during the intramuscular vaccine administration. And I could add that the Green Book in the UK doesn't recommend it either. I mean, I'm not making this up. This is the CDC, the WHO, and the Green Book, the official government bodies that control vaccination in the United Kingdom, are saying, don't do your injections properly. Don't aspirate. They actually say, don't aspirate. It's unbelievable. This is just beyond my ability to comprehend, I'm afraid.
Am I allowed to? So this is up. I got this from YouTube. So this has been up for a few days on YouTube. So he's got a major paper that tells you that the guidance that you're getting on injections don't follow the frickin' manufacturer's recommendations even. And they don't follow this new major study. You're supposed to aspirate. He knows that. And they're not doing it. And they're not doing it because they say it will reduce the soreness of your arm. But this paper says you can accidentally intravenously give someone that vaccine, which is going to do what they said in their paper.
Direct quote from the article, the CDC Pink Book 2020 and the WHO 2015 position paper have recommended against aspiration prior to vaccination so as to minimise pain. Is there?
That's it, as to minimise pain. Don't do the aspiration so you will minimise pain. That's what the CDC says.
I think that is completely, utterly wrong.
Completely, utterly wrong.
Now, this article also said that, of course, we're giving the vaccine into the deltoid muscle up here. But from the deltoid muscle into the lymphatics under the axillary lymph nodes there's a pretty direct communication from there. Whereas if you give it into the vastus lateralis muscle, that's the thigh muscle up there, that into that thigh muscle, and it's got to go through quite a lot more lymphatics to get into the blood. So they think that giving it into the vastus lateralis, into the upper outer aspect of the thigh, might be better. They're not.
So again, they're learning things about this vaccine every day. No long-term studies. But they're mandating everybody get this thing, and according to this new major paper, it's being administered incorrectly. They're not aspirating the syringe.
Sure about that, but they say it's that's a possibility, so worth considering. Our study indicates that intravenous injection of the vaccine might partly contribute to this clinical phenotype. So they're being very cautious. Clinical phenotype means what's going wrong with the heart and the liver, thus warranting a reconsideration of the practice of intramuscular injection without aspiration. Again, they're putting this very clinically, but that's a direct quote from the paper. If it's in italics, it's a direct quote, which carries an inadvertent risk of intravenous injection. So there we go. Case proved in mice.
So this is how science is supposed to work. They have the CDC, the WHO, the Green Book. They have their recommendation, and now these scientists didn't believe their recommendation, so they challenged it and did a study, and now they have better data that disproves that recommendation. That's how science works. There's never this idea that the science is solid and it's all agreed upon, and they're always constantly questioning. That's how science works. Question it. And if it can't stand up to questions, if it can stand up to questions, what are you afraid of? So again, but you're not allowed to question anything anymore, or you're a Trumper and a conspiracy theorist. But here's a bunch of smarty pants doctors who did a study that questioned the science, and it turned out it was wrong. You should be aspirating. They're recommending you should be aspirating.
And of course, mice and mammals are exactly the same as we are. We really need to change this practice. Now, in terms of the adenovirus vector vaccines.
So here's how he concluded. The guy's beside himself.
But there's very few of them. So there we go. I understand it now. You understand it now, but our governments don't. If you can think of something to do, please do, because, I mean, why don't we do it properly? Right. Anything you can think of to rectify the situation. The references are there in the description. If you know anyone in power, get them to change the policy so we stick the needle in, draw back. If there's no blood, then we inject, keeping the needle in exactly the same position. So you stick it in, you hold it where it is so the needle's not going forward or back. You aspirate. If there's no blood, then you inject it with the needle not going forward or back. And what I do is I'll just stick the needle in like that. I'll stick it in, and then I'll hold my fingers just against the patient's skin to keep it in just the right position. And I've taught student nurses to do that using that exact technique for well over 30 years. And now the CDC, WHO and Public Health England say you don't need to bother doing it. If you can think of anything, please do. Thank you for listening.
So let me bring in Max Blumenthal.
There's very few of them.
Hang on. Let me bring in Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone. We're talking about vaccine mandates. We're talking about vaccine safety. We're talking about this being mandated. And according to this new major paper that is peer-reviewed, says that they're not administering those vaccines properly. How could you mandate someone do that? Max?
Well, I can't. I haven't read the study, so I can't comment on it. What I can say is that there have been a number of simulations that were run for a pandemic that looked very similar to the one that we're experiencing. And it's really shocking that given how many simulations that were run by Rockefeller Foundation, you have Gates, Event 201, Johns Hopkins SPARS in 2017, and how well they choreographed the pandemic, that so many clear mistakes have been made and so many lies have been told. It really is an indictment of the biomedical establishment and the technocracy it represents. And I would point anyone watching this to page 60, 61 of the Johns Hopkins SPARS simulation, where this is about a pandemic in, I think, 2025. And the researchers and those participating in the simulation forecasted that the vaccine would potentially cause adverse effects that would only be felt years after the vaccines were administered. So this was in a 2017 simulation, and this was well understood that the vaccines could potentially have adverse effects years after people took their first doses, yet they're being mandated as quickly as possible without the adequate research. At the Gray Zone, I was really proud to publish a piece by Marcy Smith Parenti, who is a self-identified socialist and feminist, on the menstrual disruptions that many women she knows were experiencing from the vaccine, and the resistance that other women of childbearing age were exhibiting because of the fact that they know so many women who are experiencing menstrual disruptions, and they're worried that it could interfere with their ability to have a child. They're of an age where their chance of dying from COVID is practically nil. And number two, no research has been devoted to this, as the vaccine's being literally rammed into people's veins at the penalty of losing their jobs. So we published a piece in August, maybe it was July. I got the usual round of attacks from the hyper-obedient lockdown left. I mean, I don't even know what left is anymore. And the NIH proceeded to announce something like 6 weeks after we published this, and there have been other articles about this issue. The NIH went and authorized $1.5 million to research the impact of vaccines on women's menstrual cycles and childbearing, but not until after the CDC went out and urged all pregnant women to get vaccinated ahead of the mandates. So the cart's coming before the horse here in many cases. We're not really necessarily thinking about public health. It's about rushing this response, which is having very questionable results on a population level. On an individual level, it's protecting people against death. On a population level, the jury's still out. So that's just one of many examples about how the biomedical establishment doesn't even know necessarily what the long-term impact is going to be. We can forecast what the long-term social impact is going to be of mandates if vaccine passports stay in place, and it is a social credit system, and if boosters come into effect, as they have in Israel, then everyone who's fully vaccinated now or who went out and got vaccinated earlier this year becomes unvaccinated, and they have to stay on that booster treadmill in order to maintain their social credit. In other words, in order to maintain their passport to society, to be able to go to the gym, to be able to go to a restaurant, to be able to even go to a supermarket. In Lithuania, people without vaccine passports cannot go to the supermarket now, I believe. So it's a frightening reality that we're entering if these measures stay in place. And at the same time, we really don't know what the biomedical establishment knows. That's what's lending so many people to take resistant stances on the vaccine, because they've been lied to. Research hasn't been devoted. Sufficient research hasn't been devoted to adverse effects. The VAERS system is not functioning as it's supposed to. That's the self-reporting system. It's only reporting a fraction of people's adverse reactions, and it's creating fear and hostility among a part of the population, totally understandably.
Well, on to our next. We're actually going to do our next story is about a doctor. It involves a doctor who was one of the leading guys debunking all the misinformation about the vaccines and their side effects, who is now suffering from tinnitus. I thought it was called tinnitus. And so he's getting a little bit of a different point of view. We're doing a live Jimmy Dore show in Sacramento, October 3rd. We just added a second show. Plus, we're doing stand-up comedy in Florida, in West Palm Beach, and Dania. And then we're going to Buffalo, Baltimore, Tempe, and Portland. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all our tickets.